The times of the book are over. I think we're living in a time where you can't just point to a single book and say, well, read this one if you want to know about something. I was just reading Julian Jaynes' Origins of Consciousness, and I don't know, I was the third sentence in, I was like, no, this is wrong. Does it even make sense to continue reading this book when you know that this is a wrong framing of an issue and there is an entire discourse which proves this to be wrong? Where would this lead? And this has generally been my experience with books. If you read them the way we did back in the day a few decades ago, where you try to read the whole thing and see what the story tells you, and when you give it the necessary time and the necessary shift in perspective which it elicits in you, you just won't be adequately trained to deal with any problem that we're facing today. If we were to just read books as we did back in the day, and the way that it is so usually so applauded by everyone, and everybody is missing our ability to sit there with something and just read it patiently. Instead, everybody's jumping from micro engagement to micro engagement through social media. And we're wishing for people to be able to read again. But then once you start reading, you figure out you could do it just for the pleasure of it. And there certainly is something to reading a book. Just reading a book and not expecting anything out of it. Just not doing it for the cognitive result, but just doing it for the sake of it. But you shouldn't be expecting the book to prepare you for life, particularly for present day challenges. Present day challenges are so multidimensional. Everything's coming together. You have to have an understanding of psychology, you have to have an understanding of spirituality, you have to have an understanding of geopolitics, of narrative warfare. All possible dimensions are coming together when in our present day decisions. You have to understand how basic human psychology works, how addiction works, how sense making works. And whatever book you take up just won't be able to deliver that to you. It will always be fragmented and won't help you with specific decisions that you have to make even in your personal life. Like relatively small things like what to look at, what to pay attention to, what to learn next. Books just won't help you. So if you drive down the expectations, you can enjoy reading books, but you really shouldn't be expecting them to help us figure things out. And particularly, we shouldn't be expecting them to help us come up with working strategies to cope with the complexity of present day life, right? Even on a collective level. Like how do you fight the new wars, the present day wars? How do you win those wars? I think books are just not, as a medium, generally incapable of preparing us for the challenges that we're facing. And this is something that I think needs understanding. That going back to the book is not a solution. And obviously social media is not a solution either. But we have to figure out new ways of bringing complexity into the picture in engaging ways that properly inform you and where you can properly point to something that gives you a condensed version and a deep version that helps you figure out certain waters and the dangers in certain waters. And books are not the thing. It's very similar. Like when somebody's asking you what book would you recommend to understand, for example, the Russia-Ukraine conflict today, you couldn't point to a single book. As Vlad Wexler recently said, that the issue is this thing is such a polydimensional challenge. You couldn't point to one single author who really covers it and who gives you the entire picture and a solid understanding for something that is really close to us here in Europe, like the conflict between Russia and Ukraine. And this stuff we should actually be properly informed on, and yet there is no source which we could look at and learn from to get properly informed on these issues. There is not one single book that you can consult. There is not one single channel or one single whatever. And that's the challenge of today. And I'll be curious to see how we deal with that challenge. This is, I think, more of a challenge than most other things. we have to find replacements for books, replacements which are just as engaging, but more properly bringing you in touch with actual workable solutions and the complexity of the problems at hand. So not as simplistic as books are. And books are relatively complex compared to snippets and pieces on social media. And yet they're all flat stories. They're one-dimensional stories which try to give you a sense for what something looks like from the vantage point of an author who is usually extremely partially informed on any issue. And this is not how we can approach reality anymore. It's just not working, and we've seen it. So the revival of the book, I think, will not be in the form of a book. It won't be reading books, but it will be something different. It will be something else, which is a combination, I guess, of both worlds. It is something which to a certain degree has to be linear, because this is the way we take in information, whether we like it or not. This is the way you can keep attention span active. And on the other hand, it will have this micro-learning character to it as well, which is so typical. I mean, the positive aspect of social media is the micro-learning aspect, that you break down relatively complex problems into relatively digestible small units of thought that are not taking more than a few minutes, right? Seldomly more than 10 minutes. So it will be a combination between that, this micro-learning character, the linear narrative character, which gives you a developmental plot of those micro-learnings, brings them together. And it will also have to have the aspect of multi-perspectivity, so that it's not just one linear narrative, but that you have different multiple perspectives coming together, being brought together, coexisting, is equally important when you're dealing with complex problems. So that you realize that you can have two truths, if you want, or two perspectives at the very same time, being equally true. For example, that Ukraine being a corrupt country can be equally true to the fact that Russia needs Ukraine and needs NATO to be an enemy to actually maintain internal stability and regime security. Both are true at the same time, right? Coming from different narratives and coming from different vantage points, of course, coming from different camps who hold different positions in this situation of warfare, and yet both are true at the same time. And the change will have to happen on a structural level, not on the level of what specific story you tell, but through what kind of medium you tell it, so that it can find different anchoring points and connections to multiple knowledge practices and sources of truth. This is something that books, unfortunately, cannot live up to, and not to talk about social media, which is, kind of a joke.